Hey! Welcome back to another episode of Today from Yesterday. If you're wondering why I'm wearing such a poofy jacket, it's because we don't use the heat because we're cheap and it's really cold out right now. But anyway, welcome back to the next episode on Star Wars. We're just gonna pick up from where the last video left off, so if you haven't seen that one, you should go check it out. So if you remember from the last video, we looked at the relationship between the New Republic, the First Order, and the Resistance. And we saw how the Resistance was an agent of the New Republic, waging a proxy war with the First Order. So the question was, why did they let the space lasers fire in the first place? And the answer is that they just didn't have the resources to stop it. That sounds sort of like a cop-out, but let me dig into it. What is likely, and what is supported by Akbar's line in the movie, you know, the part where he's like, "That's almost half our fleet," is that the Resistance wasn't getting a lot of funding from the New Republic, like, at all. The war against the Empire was likely a very destructive one, given the Empire's tendency to blow up whole planets, which, on a side note, doesn't really seem like the proper thing to do, unless the galaxy is literally overflowing with resources. I mean, these ships need a lot, they're so big and there's so many of them. But then again, they demonstrated that they're able to condense the energy of a star into a planet. I mean, lightsabers are a perfect example of condensed energy. Same with blaster rifles. I mean, that's a whole video in and of itself. Anyway, boundless amounts of energy or not, likely much of the resources that the New Republic has is going into rebuilding infrastructure. Infrastructure is vital to the success of a nation. You see this all throughout history. Nations are more than willing to invest heavily in the creation of a proper infrastructure. Rome built highways. Napoleon completely redesigned Paris in order to give it wider avenues. America has a massive highway system. Basically, you need the ability to transport goods and resources efficiently. So likely any superfluous fleets that weren't accidentally given to the Resistance were recycled into freighters. So there's a supply issue that's affecting the Resistance, but there's also likely an extreme lack of personnel. As opposed to the First Order, who has a tight grip on its personnel and crew, reminiscent of the kind of control Nazis had. I mean, not to mention they literally kidnapped babies. Did anyone else feel like this got glossed over in the movie? Just like, oh, just another tally mark in the evil column. I bet in the good column there's like, the coffee's alright. So, the people within First Order space are likely extremely oppressed, like coal into diamond kinds of oppressed. This kind of oppression would severely limit any kind of volunteers that the Resistance would get within First Order space. Plus, the Resistance has to be worried about spies infiltrating the organization and completely blowing their cover. Have you ever seen the movie The Lives of Others? If you haven't, you should go check it out. It's a great movie. Anyway, the movie is about a man whose job it is to spy on people. He is a member of an organization called the Stasi, which is arguably the most successful secret police in the history of the world. After World War II, Berlin was split right down the middle, with the US controlling the East and the Soviets controlling the West. Anyway, the Stasi's task was to make sure that the Americans weren't spreading dissidents, which they were, and that civilians were behaving properly, which some were not. The movie I mentioned shows exactly how involved the surveillance was. I don't want to give too much away, but he was watching a couple, and he would watch them all day from the same apartment that they lived in. So it's safe to say that a regime like the First Order would definitely have a budget set aside for espionage. Oh man, think about noir-inspired spy movies set in the Star Wars universe. Hit me up, Hollywood. I've got ideas. The point I'm making is that the Resistance needs to stay small in order to be undetectable and be more mobile, which is extremely important in guerrilla warfare. Go see Red Dawn. Plus, recruitment of members is extremely high risk, and any they get are probably going to come from the New Republic, and it's not like they're going to have recruitment centers set up, like the Navy at the mall. Plus, the pay isn't very high. All this promise is probably like, well, you're going to sit in a cave for a while, you might die. Come join the Resistance, which brings me to my next point. Less people means less resources required to feed everybody, which means less strain on their budget. Being this small means that the Resistance cannot afford to take very many risks. Any small amount of loss is going to be devastating. So, even if the Resistance knew the full capabilities of the weapon before it was fired, they really did not have the means to do anything about it. So instead, the Resistance really lucked out with Han showing up when he did and having the piloting skills to do what he did. And yet they still almost didn't come out of it okay. The whole tension of this last act is derived from the fact that if they don't stop the super weapon, the Resistance is all but lost, and the First Order is going to be able to sweep across the galaxy and take everything over. But think about all the ships they lost in the attack, and think about how the little support that they did get was completely wiped out. The movie ends on a high note. You feel good once they've destroyed the super weapon. I mean, that's a huge blow to the First Order. But is it really? The movie makes it seem like the Resistance won, but to me, it seems like the Resistance lost most of its capability of waging any type of war, whereas the First Order just lost their super weapon. We'll have to wait for the next movies to see if the Resistance can recuperate. But it was a handful of people that brought the Empire to its knees in the original trilogy, so I think they still got a shot. As Han Solo would say, never tell me the odds. See you next time.